My sister Iman made all 5 of her bridesmaids wear custom lavender silk gowns. When it came to me, her only flesh and blood sister, she tossed a cheap bright orange dress in a size 3XL into my lap. I am a size medium. She smirked and told me it was the only one left, and that orange suited my skin tone anyway. My mother warned me to stop acting broke and ruining the vibe. I just smiled and packed the dress away. What they did not know was that I owned a secret haute couture atelier, and the multi-million-dollar estate where the wedding was being held was entirely in my name. Before I get into the juicy details, let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing a toxic family get a harsh reality check. I stood in the center of the most exclusive bridal boutique in downtown Atlanta. The air smelled of expensive champagne and fresh white roses. All around me, 5 women stepped out of their dressing rooms looking like absolute royalty. These were Iman's chosen bridesmaids, her sorority sisters, and social climbing friends. They were twirling in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirrors, admiring their matching lavender silk gowns. The fabric was imported, the cuts were flawless, and each dress had been tailored to fit their bodies perfectly. Then there was me, Zuri, the older sister, the outcast. Iman stood on a pedestal in her $80,000 wedding gown, sipping a mimosa. She looked down at me with a perfectly manicured smile that did not reach her eyes. She casually reached into a plastic shopping bag sitting on a chair nearby and tossed a wadded-up piece of fabric right at my chest. I caught it and let the fabric unfold. It was neon orange, the kind of aggressive, blinding orange you would see on a traffic cone or a prison jumpsuit. The material felt like cheap, scratchy polyester rubbing against my hands. I checked the tag on the collar, size 3XL. I looked down at my own body. I have maintained a strict size medium my entire adult life. I looked back up at Iman holding the neon fabric up to the soft lighting of the boutique. "What exactly is this, Iman?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level. Iman let out a high-pitched, rehearsed laugh. "Oh, do not be difficult, Zuri. The boutique ran out of the lavender silk for the final dress. That orange was the only thing they had left in the clearance section that matched our secondary color palette. Besides, orange really complements your dark skin tone. Just wear it. It is not like anyone is going to be looking at you anyway. You are just going to be standing at the very edge of the photos." The 5 lavender bridesmaids giggled behind their champagne flutes. They knew exactly what this was. This was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. Iman wanted me to look like a giant glowing pumpkin standing next to her perfectly curated bridal party. She wanted to make sure everyone at the wedding knew my place in the family hierarchy. At the very bottom, before I could even reply, my mother Vivian marched over. Vivian was a woman who practically worshipped status. She was wearing a designer suit she bought on credit just to impress the boutique staff. She snatched the orange dress from my hands and shoved it back against my chest. "Stop making everything about you, Zuri," my mother snapped, her voice sharp and echoing in the quiet boutique. "Your sister is marrying Preston Worthington. Do you have any idea what that means? The Worthingtons are New England royalty. They have generational wealth. They have a trust fund that dates back to the 1800s. Iman is securing this family's future, and you are standing here complaining about a dress." I looked at my mother. "Actually, Mom, I am complaining because this dress is 3 sizes too big and made of plastic. It is a highly flammable tripping hazard." "Do not use that sarcastic tone with me," Vivian hissed, grabbing my arm tightly. "You are 32 years old and still hustling in the mud trying to sell clothes online or whatever little hobby you are doing these days. Iman actually made something of herself. She secured a high society man. You should be grateful we even let you be in the bridal party considering your broke energy. Do not bring your poverty mindset to this wedding and ruin it for your sister. You will put that orange dress on, you will smile, and you will stay out of the way. Do you understand me?" I looked at the cheap orange polyester in my hands. I looked at my sister, who was grinning triumphantly from her pedestal. And I looked at my mother, who was willing to dress her eldest daughter like a clown just to appease her own social climbing fantasies. Years ago, a younger version of me would have cried. When I was 20, I would have screamed and fought back. That was the year my father Marcus drained my entire college savings account to buy Iman a luxury Mercedes just because she secured a basic public relations internship. I had to drop out of college because of them. They called me a failure, a dropout, a disgrace. I spent my 20s eating ramen noodles, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and working 20-hour days to build a life from absolute scratch. They never checked on me. They only called when they needed money or when they wanted to remind me how far behind Iman I was. But I was not 20 anymore. I was 32, and I had learned a very valuable lesson in silence. When your enemies are busy digging their own graves, you do not take the shovel out of their hands. I took a deep breath, letting a serene smile wash over my face. I folded the orange dress neatly and tucked it under my arm. "You are completely right, Mom," I said, my voice dripping with smooth honey. "It is Iman's big day. I would never want to ruin her aesthetic. I will wear the orange dress. It is beautiful." Iman looked slightly disappointed that I did not put up a fight. She loved drama when she was the victor, but she quickly recovered and took another sip of her mimosa. "Good. Now go sit in the waiting area, Zuri. The real bridesmaids need to take some photos for social media." I walked out of the fitting area and out the front doors of the boutique into the warm Atlanta afternoon. I did not walk to the bus stop like my mother probably assumed I would. I walked 2 blocks down the street and unlocked my custom matte black luxury SUV. I tossed the cheap orange dress onto the plush leather passenger seat and started the engine. My family thought I was a struggling online vendor barely scraping by. They thought I was a failure because I refused to buy flashy designer logos or post my bank statements on the internet. I preferred to move in silence. The truth was, I had spent the last decade building an empire. I drove straight to the industrial district, pulling into a private secured underground parking garage. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors opened to reveal a massive sunlit loft space filled with dozens of seamstresses' mannequins and rolls of the finest fabrics imported from Italy and France. This was Zia Couture, my private haute couture atelier. I catered exclusively to high-profile celebrity clients, royalty, and billionaires who valued absolute discretion. My designs started at $50,000 apiece, and I owned the entire operation 100% debt-free. I walked into my private design suite and tossed the orange polyester dress onto my cutting table. My lead tailor, Maria, walked in and gasped when she saw the fabric. "Zuri, what on earth is that monstrosity?" she asked, looking offended by the mere presence of the cheap garment. I smiled, picking up my fabric shears. "This, Maria, is my bridesmaid dress, and we have exactly 48 hours to completely reconstruct it." While Maria looked at me like I had lost my mind, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my property management team. I pulled it out and read the text. It was a status update on a weekend rental booking. My family had been bragging to everyone who would listen about Iman's wedding venue. They told the entire neighborhood that Iman was getting married at the Obsidian Estate, a highly exclusive, ultra-luxurious private compound located on a private lake just outside the city. It was a venue so prestigious that you could not just book it with money. You had to be approved by the anonymous owner. Iman had been telling people that our father Marcus used his old business connections to secure a massive discount for her. I laughed out loud in my quiet office. My father owned a struggling mid-tier construction company that had been rejected for a repair contract at that very estate 5 years ago. He had absolutely zero connections to the owner. He had zero connections because the anonymous billionaire owner of the Obsidian Estate was me. I bought the sprawling property 3 years ago through a blind trust. I bought it because the land it sat on originally belonged to my great-grandfather, a hard-working black man who had his property unjustly stripped away by discriminatory zoning laws decades ago. I bought it back with my own money to restore my family's stolen generational wealth. My parents had told me I was stupid for caring about dead history and told me to use that money to help Iman pay off her credit card debt instead. So I never told them I actually finalized the purchase. I looked down at the text message from my property manager. It read, The bridal party for the Adams-Worthington wedding has requested an extension on their final venue payment. They are asking to delay the $200,000 balance until Monday after the wedding. Do we approve? I stared at the screen. My sister was throwing a wedding she absolutely could not afford to impress a white family of old money aristocrats. She was using my venue. She was delaying my payment. And she had just handed me a neon orange trash bag to wear in front of hundreds of people. I tapped the screen and typed my reply to the property manager. Deny the extension. They have until the day of the wedding to process the full payment. If the card declines, initiate the eviction protocol immediately. I locked my phone and picked up my fabric shears. The blade sliced smoothly through the cheap orange polyester. My mother and sister wanted me to wear orange. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to bring a wildfire to the Obsidian estate, and I was going to watch their entire house of cards burn to the ground. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my custom matte black SUV, navigating the chaotic Atlanta traffic. The heavy silence inside the soundproof cabin offered a stark contrast to the ringing in my ears from my mother's screaming at the bridal boutique. On the plush passenger seat sat the neon orange fabric, a glowing, garish reminder of exactly who my family was and how they viewed me. My mother assumed I would be taking the bus back to some cramped apartment. She thought I was still the struggling, broke 22-year-old girl they had thrown to the wolves a decade ago. She had absolutely no idea that the vehicle I was driving cost more than my father's entire construction company was currently worth. As I watched the city's skyline pass by, the bitter memory of my defining betrayal hit me with fresh intensity. It was the moment the invisible cord tying me to my family finally snapped. I was 20 years old, standing in the university financial aid office, clutching a piece of paper that said my tuition check had bounced. My entire college fund was gone. It was a joint account I had poured all my part-time job earnings into, alongside the small inheritance my grandfather had left specifically for my education. The balance was zero. I had panicked, thinking it was a bank error or a case of identity theft. I ran a mile and a half all the way to my parents' house, bursting through the front door, only to find my father Marcus standing in the driveway holding a set of shiny silver keys. Right beside him sat a brand new, pristine white Mercedes-Benz. Iman was squealing and jumping up and down, hugging my father. She had just landed a basic, unpaid public relations internship at a local boutique firm. My father had drained my entire educational future to buy her a luxury car. When I confronted him screaming and crying about my tuition, Marcus had looked at me with absolute zero remorse. He told me that Iman needed to look the part. He said the corporate world was about image, and pulling up in a Mercedes would open doors for her sister. When I begged him to explain how I was supposed to stay in school, my father simply shrugged his shoulders. He told me I was smart enough to take out student loans. He said my graphic design and fashion courses were just a frivolous hobby anyway, whereas Iman had real prospects and needed the investment. My mother had stood right next to him, nodding in agreement, telling me to stop being so selfish and to celebrate my sister's success. That was the day I packed my bags into trash bags and walked out. I dropped out of college because I could not afford to stay. I moved into a tiny, windowless basement apartment that smelled like damp concrete. I worked 3 grueling jobs. I waitressed until midnight, cleaned corporate offices at dawn, and sewed my own designs on a broken secondhand machine until my fingers literally bled. Every dollar I made, I hid. Every contact I built, I nurtured in total secrecy. I built my luxury haute couture brand, Z a couture, off the immense pain of that betrayal. I vowed that I would never depend on anyone again, and I would never let my family know I had succeeded. To them, I was just selling clothes online. Suddenly, the harsh ringing of my car's Bluetooth system interrupted my thoughts. The infotainment screen flashed my mother's name, Vivian. I took a deep, centering breath and pressed accept. Before I could even say a standard greeting, my mother's voice filled the car, sharp, frantic, and incredibly demanding. Zuri, I need you to wire $5,000 to my account by noon today. I kept my eyes on the road, my expression hardening. $5,000. For what exactly? It is for the floral arrangements, Vivian snapped, sounding genuinely annoyed that she even had to explain herself. Iman decided the imported white orchids need to cascade all the way down the grand staircase at the venue. The florist is demanding a massive upcharge for the extra labor and imported stems. You are her sister. You should be contributing to this wedding instead of just showing up to eat the food and take up space. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Mom Iman has 5 bridesmaids who actually come from extreme wealth. Preston's family is practically funding the entire state. Why on earth are you calling me for $5,000? Because you owe this family? Vivian demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. The least you can do is pull your weight for once in your life. I know things are extremely tight for you with that little online hustle you refuse to give up, but you need to learn how to sacrifice for the greater good. Ransack your savings account. Take out a high-interest credit card. Do whatever you have to do. Iman cannot have a bare staircase at a venue like this. It would be a complete embarrassment. I am not giving you a single dime, I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of her hysteria. Not for imported orchids, not for anything. My online hustle is doing just fine, but my money is my money. I am not setting myself on fire to keep Iman warm. The line went dead silent for a split second before Vivian completely exploded. You selfish, bitter little girl. You have always been deeply jealous of your sister. You are just mad because she is marrying a Worthington while you are still a nobody living a pathetic life. You want her to look cheap in front of her new in-laws. Well, it is not going to work. Iman secured the most exclusive venue in the entire state of Georgia. I rolled my eyes, merging into the fast lane. Yes, Mom, I know. You have reminded everyone in the greater Atlanta area 50 times. You have no idea what you are talking about. Vivian screamed, her pride wounded. She rented the Obsidian estate. Do you even know what that is? It is a private billionaire compound. You cannot even get past the front gates without an extensive background check and a personal invitation. The Worthingtons are going to be completely blown away. Your father had to pull some major strings with an old business partner just to get the owner to approve our application. He got us a massive discount because of his powerful connections. We are untouchable, Zuri. Untouchable. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The heavy SUV screeched to a sudden violent halt at a red light, the tires gripping the asphalt hard. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, not from fear but from a sudden staggering realization. The Obsidian estate. My mother was aggressively bragging to me about the Obsidian estate. I bought that sprawling property 3 years ago through an anonymous blind trust. I bought it because the massive lakefront land it sat on originally belonged to my great-grandfather, a hard-working black man who had his property unjustly stripped away by discriminatory redlining laws in the 1960s. I had used my own hard-earned wealth to buy back my ancestors' legacy and turn it into the crown jewel of the state. My parents had told me I was delusional for caring about dead history. They had demanded I use my savings to help Iman pay off her massive credit card debt instead of chasing real estate dreams. Because of their toxic reactions, I never told them I actually finalized the purchase. I kept my ownership a total secret. Are you still there? Vivian barked through the speakers, pulling me back to the present moment. Wire the money, Zuri. Do not make me ask you again. If you ruin this for your sister, I will never forgive you. I stared at the glowing red light in front of me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. The absolute irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. My father had zero connections. My father owned a struggling mid-tier construction company that had actually been rejected for a repair contract at my estate 5 years ago because his work was substandard. Iman was throwing a wedding she absolutely could not afford, lying to a family of old money aristocrats, and using my very own property to stage her grand illusion. I will see what I can do, Mom, I said smoothly, letting my voice sound perfectly defeated. I will see you at the rehearsal dinner. I ended the call before my mother could utter another word. The light turned green and I pressed the accelerator with renewed purpose. I tapped a button on my steering wheel, dialing my property manager. The line connected immediately. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice cold and precise. The Adams-Worthington wedding this weekend at the estate. I want a full immediate audit of their account. I want to know exactly how much they owe, what credit cards they put on file, and what fake financial documentation they provided to secure the booking. Do not process their final payment yet. Wait until I give the signal. We are going to let them set up the entire event first. My property manager agreed without a single moment of hesitation. I disconnected the call, the neon orange dress catching the sunlight in the passenger seat. My family wanted me to stay out of the way. They wanted me to wear cheap polyester and hide in the shadows while they pretended to be royalty on my land. But they had just unknowingly invited the owner of the house to the biggest performance of their lives. And the owner was about to cancel the show. The rehearsal dinner the next evening took place in the private mahogany-paneled dining room of the Capital City Club. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive perfumes, and the suffocating desperation of my parents. The Worthingtons occupied the left side of the long banquet table. They were the very picture of New England old money. Preston's parents, Arthur and Eleanor Worthington, wore understated cashmere and bespoke tailoring. They spoke in quiet, measured tones, never needing to raise their voices to command attention. At the head of their side sat Lady Beatrice Worthington, Preston's grandmother. She was 82 years old, with posture like a steel rod and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She wore a simple black dress adorned only by a string of authentic South Sea pearls. On our side of the table, my mother Vivian was a walking disaster of overcompensation. She arrived wearing a heavy sequined gown that belonged at a New Year's Eve gala, not an intimate family dinner. She was loud, excessively animated, and repeatedly tried to order the waitstaff around with snappy gestures just to prove she belonged in a room like this. I sat in absolute silence at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. I was wearing a simple tailored navy suit. I watched the performance unfold like a poorly written stage play. My father Marcus leaned over his glass of 18-year-old scotch to address Arthur Worthington. He puffed out his chest and adjusted his tie, making sure the entire table was listening. I have to tell you, Arthur, the venue for tomorrow was nothing. Just a small favor. Arthur politely set down his glass. The Obsidian Estate is legendary, Marcus. We tried to book it for a corporate retreat 3 years ago and were told the waiting list is strictly by private invitation only. You must have incredible connections. My father let out a booming, arrogant laugh that made Lady Beatrice visibly flinch. The owner is an old business partner of mine. Marcus lied smoothly without a single ounce of hesitation. He owed me a massive favor from a commercial build my company did for him back in the 90s. When I told him my little girl was getting married, he practically begged me to let Iman use the estate for free. He said it was the least he could do for the man who helped build his empire. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the cold liquid soothe the sudden urge to laugh out loud. My father had never built a commercial property in his life. His mid-tier construction company was currently drowning in debt and facing multiple lawsuits for substandard residential work. The sheer audacity to sit across from a family of generational wealth and fabricate a story about owning favors from billionaires was staggering. He was sitting in the same room as the actual owner of the estate, spinning lies to stroke his own fragile ego. Preston bless his golden retriever. Hart smiled warmly at everyone. He was completely oblivious to the toxic dynamics of my family. He reached across the table and took Iman's hand. We are just so grateful, Mr. Adams. Iman told me how hard you worked to secure it. She said you practically own half the real estate in Atlanta. Iman smiled, but it was a tight, nervous thing. She quickly took a large gulp of her champagne, her eyes darting nervously toward me. She knew I knew the truth about our father's failing business, but she also assumed I was too beaten down to ever speak up. Preston then turned his bright, naive gaze toward my end of the table. Zuri Iman talks about you so much. But she never mentioned what industry you are in. Are you in real estate like your father? The temperature in the room plummeted. Iman's face drained of color. She panicked, terrified that I might say something to shatter the illusion of perfection she had carefully sold to the Worthingtons. Before I could even open my mouth to reply, Iman spoke up loudly, making sure her voice carried across the entire room. Oh, Preston, do not bother Zuri with business talk. She does not really do the corporate thing. She is currently in between jobs, taking a long gap year to figure herself out. My mother, Vivian, immediately chimed in laughing, with a cruel, mocking edge. Yes, we are just happy she could take some time away from lounging on our couch to be here tonight. We are a family that believes in charity, Preston. We always take care of our own, even the ones who refuse to launch. She is our little unemployed artist. A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The Worthingtons exchanged tight, polite glances, clearly appalled by the blatant disrespect my mother and sister were showing to their own blood. Arthur cleared his throat and looked away. Eleanor took a sudden, intense interest in her napkin. But Lady Beatrice did not look away. She set down her sterling silver fork. The sharp clink of the metal hitting the porcelain plate echoed through the quiet room. She stood up, leaning slightly on her polished wooden cane. The entire table froze as the matriarch slowly walked down the length of the dining room. She bypassed my father. She ignored my mother. She stopped right beside my chair at the far end of the table. Eamon looked absolutely triumphant. She sat up straighter, a smug grin forming on her face, completely convinced that this aristocratic woman was coming over to put the unemployed mooching sister in her place. Lady Beatrice did not look at my face. Her sharp, calculating eyes locked onto my left wrist, which was resting casually on the edge of the mahogany table. Protruding just slightly from the tailored sleeve of my navy suit was a vintage rose-gold Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch. I had bought it for myself in Geneva to celebrate my first 10 million in cash reserves. It was a masterpiece of quiet wealth. A piece that flashed no logos but spoke volumes to anyone who actually knew money. Lady Beatrice slowly lifted her gaze from my wrist and looked dead center at Iman, pinning my sister to her seat with a look of absolute aristocratic disdain. Unemployed. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the room like a frozen blade. An unemployed person does not wear an asset worth 3 houses on their wrist. The clinking of silverware and hushed whispers followed me as the rehearsal dinner mercifully drew to a close. I stood up from the heavy mahogany chair, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my navy suit, fully intending to hand my valet ticket to the concierge and disappear into the Atlanta night. I barely made it past the grand velvet drapes of the dining room before a hand clamped around my bicep with the ferocity of a steel trap. Long acrylic nails dug painfully through the wool of my sleeve. I did not even have to turn around to know it was Iman. She yanked me down the dimly lit corridor and shoved me through the heavy oak doors of the women's lounge. The room was a sanctuary of rose quartz and gold fixtures, empty of other guests, but thick with the suffocating scent of my sister's signature floral perfume, mingled with stale champagne. Iman locked the door behind us with a sharp, definitive click. The demure, blushing bride persona she had worn all evening instantly evaporated, replaced by a frantic, wild-eyed desperation that made her look entirely unhinged. "You just could not help yourself, could you, Zuri?" Iman paced the length of the marble floor, her sequined rehearsal dress catching the vanity lights. "You just had to wear a watch worth a fortune. You had to make Lady Beatrice look at you. You had to make me look like a fool in front of my future in-laws." I leaned casually against the edge of the marble sink, crossing my arms over my chest. "I wore a watch, Iman. I did not force you to lie about my employment status, and I certainly did not force you to pretend you were marrying into money as an equal. You played a stupid game and you lost." Iman let out a harsh, breathless laugh, dragging her hands through her perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive blowout. "I do not have time for your self-righteous lectures tonight." She marched up to me, invading my personal space, her chest heaving. "I need you to fix this, right now." "Fix what?" I asked, my voice remaining completely flat. She reached down the front of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of thick cardstock, slamming it onto the marble counter between us. It was the itemized bill for the rehearsal dinner. My eyes scanned the bottom line. $12,450. The Worthingtons had ordered vintage Bordeaux and imported caviar, completely unaware that the bride's family was expected to foot the bill for the evening, or rather completely unaware that the bride's family was entirely broke. "Pay it," Iman demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the exorbitant total. I looked from the receipt to her desperate face. "Excuse me. Pay the damn bill, Zuri." Her voice cracked, bordering on a hysterical scream. "All of my credit cards are maxed out. Every single one of them." The bridal boutique placed a hold on my platinum card, the florist drained my savings, and my emergency card was declined when I tried to pay the valet tip an hour ago. If the Capital City Club manager walks out there and tells Preston that my card bounced for the rehearsal dinner, I am ruined. The Worthingtons will cancel the wedding. They will know I am broke. I stared at her in utter disbelief. The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. You maxed out your credit cards to put on a fake show for a family you are trying to trick into marrying you, and your solution is to drag me into a bathroom and order me to pay $12,000. You have the money. Iman shrieked, her face turning a mottled red. Lady Beatrice just announced to the entire room that you are wearing a Patek Philippe. You probably have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in an account somewhere while you let your own family struggle. You owe me this. You ruined my rehearsal dinner with your arrogant display of wealth so you can pay the bill to make up for it. I pushed myself off the counter, suddenly feeling a deep, radiating disgust. I do not owe you a single breath of my existence, Iman. You and Mom spent the entire evening humiliating me, calling me an unemployed mooch, treating me like dirt on your shoe to make yourselves look taller. You wanted the Worthington lifestyle. You bought it. You pay for it. I turned toward the door, entirely finished with the conversation, when it violently swung open. My mother Vivian stormed into the lounge, her heavy sequined gown swishing aggressively against the floor. She took one look at Iman's tear-streaked face and the receipt sitting on the marble counter, and she instantly understood the situation. Vivian marched directly up to me, her eyes blazing with a toxic, irrational fury. "How dare you do this to your sister?" she hissed, pointing a manicured finger inches from my face. "Do you have any idea what is at stake here? Preston is a Worthington. He is our ticket out of this miserable middle-class existence. If you do not pay that bill right now, you are going to destroy this family's entire future." I stood my ground, refusing to shrink back. This family's future was destroyed the day Dad drained my college fund to buy her a car. I stated, my voice echoing off the tile walls. "I am not your personal bank. I am not your safety net. You wanted to play rich mom. Go ahead and hand the club manager your own credit card. Let us see if it clears." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Vivian knew her own accounts were overdrawn. She knew she was drowning in debt just to keep up appearances. The realization that she had absolutely no control over me, that her golden child was about to be exposed as a fraud, shattered whatever thin veneer of sanity she had left. "You selfish, cold-blooded monster," Vivian screamed. Before I could even blink, Vivian pulled back her arm and swung. The slap was deafening. The sound cracked like a whip in the enclosed space of the bathroom. Her heavy diamond ring caught the edge of my mouth, tearing the delicate skin. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the impact. A sharp, stinging heat bloomed across my left cheek, instantly followed by the distinct metallic taste of blood pooling on my lower lip. The room fell dead silent. The only sound was Amon's ragged breathing. I did not touch my face. I did not cry. I did not scream. I slowly turned my head back to look at my mother. Vivian was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling, a look of twisted, self-righteous justification on her face. She truly believed she was disciplining a disobedient child, fully convinced that physical violence was a perfectly acceptable tool to extract money from me. "You have always been a bitter, ungrateful burden," Vivian spat, her voice laced with pure venom. "We should have abandoned you years ago. You do not know how to love. You do not know how to sacrifice. You are cold-blooded, Zuri. You have ice in your veins. Now pay the bill, or I swear to God you will be dead to me forever." I stood absolutely still, letting the stinging pain ground me in the present reality. I raised the back of my hand and slowly wiped the corner of my mouth. I looked down at my skin. A bright crimson smear of my own blood stained my knuckles. All the years of emotional abuse, All the financial manipulation, all the blatant favoritism culminated in this single undeniable moment of violence. The last remaining shred of daughterly obligation I held in my heart dissolved into absolute zero. I looked up, meeting my mother's furious gaze with eyes that were entirely devoid of emotion. I smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that made Vivian take an involuntary step backward. "Fine," I whispered, my voice smooth and lethal. "Let us see who is cold-blooded tomorrow." I did not look at Iman. I did not look at the receipt on the counter. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restroom, leaving them trapped in the cage of their own making. I strode down the long corridor of the Capital City Club, the heavy oak doors closing behind me, sealing my family inside their impending ruin. I pushed open the heavy brass front doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing Atlanta night air. The valet rushed forward to retrieve my car, but I held up a hand, signaling him to wait. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated the darkness. I opened my encrypted messaging app and pulled up the direct line to the general manager of the Obsidian estate, my property, my rules. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for only a fraction of a second before I typed out the final command. Initiate code red. The morning sun crested over the pristine private lake of the Obsidian estate, casting a golden hue across the manicured lawns and the sprawling stone architecture. Inside the primary bridal suite, a room that spanned over 2,000 square feet of Italian marble and imported crystal fixtures, chaos reigned supreme. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of burning hair tools, expensive floral perfumes, and the sharp tang of popping champagne corks. 5 women rushed around the room in identical pale lavender silk gowns, taking selfies and sipping mimosas. I pushed open the towering double mahogany doors. The heavy wood swung silently on its custom hinges. The frantic buzzing of the room stopped dead. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a stereo system. Every single eye locked onto me. I was not wearing the highly flammable, shapeless neon orange garbage bag my sister had thrown at my chest the day before. I was wearing a masterpiece. My lead tailor Maria and I had worked tirelessly through the night in my private atelier. We used the cheap polyester as a hidden base corset, but we draped pinned and sewed layers of my own imported pure silk chiffon over it. The color was a devastating, rich, burnt orange that practically glowed, perfectly complementing my dark skin. The bodice was a masterclass in structural engineering, gripping my waist tightly before cascading down into a dramatic sweeping mermaid skirt with a daring thigh-high slit. I looked like a queen forged in pure fire. The lavender bridesmaids stood absolutely frozen, their champagne flutes hovering awkwardly near their mouths. Next to my vibrant, flawlessly tailored gown, their expensive dresses looked incredibly dull, like washed-out pastel curtains. The deliberate humiliation Iman had planned was entirely inverted. Iman was sitting in a gilded makeup chair, a stylist hovering over her with a powder brush. She spun around to face the door, the blood completely drained from her face. For a split second there was only stunned, heavy silence. Then the carefully curated illusion of the graceful high society bride shattered entirely. Iman let out a guttural, ear-piercing scream. She slammed her hands down on the vanity, knocking over a tray of expensive cosmetics that clattered noisily to the marble floor. "Take it off!" Iman shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria as she pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "Take it off right now!" "What is that? What are you wearing?" I stepped further into the suite, the heavy silk of my skirt flowing behind me like liquid sunset. "I am wearing my bridesmaid dress, Iman. The exact neon orange fabric you provided for me. I just made a few minor alterations so it would not be a tripping hazard. You did tell me orange was my color." The commotion was loud enough to summon my parents from the adjoining private lounge. My father, Marcus, barged into the room, his face flushed, his tuxedo jacket completely unbuttoned. My mother, Vivian, trailed right behind him. The moment Vivian saw me, her eyes narrowed into slits of concentrated venom. The phantom sting of her heavy diamond ring cutting into my lip the night before pulsed in my memory, but my heart beat with a slow, rhythmic calm. They had absolutely no power here. "What is the meaning of this, Zuri?" Marcus roared, his deep voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He rushed to Iman's side, wrapping a protective arm around her as she began to dramatically hyperventilate into her hands, ruining her freshly applied makeup. "You are deliberately trying to ruin your sister's wedding. You come in here dressed like some kind of runway model just to steal the spotlight. You are a vindictive, jealous woman." I looked at the man who had stolen my college tuition to buy a luxury car. I looked at the woman who had physically struck me for refusing to fund their fake lifestyle. I let out a soft, melodic laugh that made Marcus clench his jaw. "I am simply following the bride's color palette." "Dad," I said, my tone as smooth as glass. "If my dress upstages her $80,000 gown, perhaps she should have chosen a stronger aesthetic for herself." Marcus pointed a trembling finger at the door, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You are out of the bridal party," he barked. "You will not walk down that aisle, you will not stand at the altar, and you are absolutely forbidden from being in any of the professional family photographs. You will take yourself to the very last row at the back of the venue, completely out of sight. You are a disgrace to this family. Do you understand me?" Vivian stood behind him, crossing her arms and smirking triumphantly. She thought she had won. She thought putting me in the back row was the ultimate punishment, a way to render me invisible to the wealthy in-laws they were so desperately trying to impress. I looked at the three of them, a desperate, broke, miserable family clinging to a fragile illusion of grandeur they were actively staging inside my own house. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. "Loud and clear, Dad," I said smoothly, turning on my heel. "I will go take my seat at the very back. I would not want to ruin your perfect performance." I walked out of the bridal suite, the heavy silk of my train gliding soundlessly across the polished floors. I navigated the sprawling, art-filled corridors of my estate, savoring the cool, quiet air of my home. As I turned the corner toward the grand staircase, Arthur, the estate's head butler, was walking briskly down the hall carrying a silver tray. The moment he saw me, he stopped dead in his tracks. To the absolute shock of anyone who might be watching, this distinguished, immaculately dressed man bowed a crisp, deep 90 degrees. "Good morning, Madam," Arthur said, his voice carrying clearly down the silent corridor. "Everything is prepared exactly to your specifications. Code Red is fully initialized and awaiting your final command." I nodded, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "Thank you, Arthur. Keep the security team on strict standby." I continued walking, but a sudden sharp intake of breath from behind me made me pause. I glanced over my shoulder. Marcus had stepped out of the bridal suite to make a phone call. He was standing completely frozen in the doorway, his phone gripped loosely in his hand, his eyes wide and completely uncomprehending as he stared at the head butler still bowing deeply in my wake. I did not break my stride. I did not turn back to look at my father. I simply kept walking down the vast sunlit corridor of my own home, the heavy silk of my burnt orange gown gliding effortlessly across the imported Italian marble. Behind me, I could practically hear the gears grinding in Marcus's head as he tried to process why a highly distinguished estate butler had just bowed to his eldest, supposedly unemployed daughter. He would likely rationalize it away. He would convince himself it was a mistake, or perhaps that the butler had confused me with one of the wealthy Worthington guests. My family possessed an incredible, almost pathological ability to deny any reality that did not fit their carefully constructed narrative. I stepped out through the massive glass terrace doors and onto the great lawn. The morning air was crisp and fragrant, carrying the scent of pine and the fresh, clean water of the private lake. The obsidian estate was truly breathtaking in the daylight. The manicured emerald grass sloped gently down toward the glittering water framed by towering ancient oak trees that provided a natural, secluded canopy. Hundreds of white wooden chairs were arranged in perfect, pristine symmetry on the lawn. At the end of the long, white carpeted aisle stood a magnificent floral arch. It was aggressively overflowing with the imported white orchids Vivian had screamed at me about just 24 hours ago. The sheer volume of the flowers was staggering, a desperate, incredibly expensive attempt to scream wealth to anyone who looked at them. The entire setup was drenched in fake luxury. It was a rented illusion. Every pedal, every chair, every crystal champagne flute currently being passed around by the catering staff was bought on borrowed time and maxed out credit. I navigated my way to the very last row of chairs exactly as my father had commanded. The guests were already beginning to take their seats. As I walked, heads turned. The burnt orange silk of my custom gown caught the morning sunlight, radiating a fierce, undeniable warmth. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I caught the eyes of a few of my mother's country club friends. Their expressions morphed from polite curiosity to absolute shock as they took in the structural perfection of my dress, the flawless draping, and the quiet, undeniable power of the woman wearing it. I was supposed to be the tragic broke sister hiding in the background. Instead, I looked like I owned the entire world. And technically, I did. I found a seat at the extreme edge of the back row, positioning myself next to a group of my father's distant business associates who barely recognized me. I crossed my legs, smoothing the silk of my skirt, and settled in to watch the show. The contrast between the two sides of the aisle was almost comical. On the left side sat the Worthingtons. They were a sea of understated elegance, wearing tailored morning suits, muted pastel dresses, and heirloom jewelry. They spoke in hushed, polite tones, sipping their sparkling water and admiring the estate grounds with quiet appreciation. On the right side sat my family's guests. They were loud, flashy, and draped in heavy designer logos. My mother was at the very front, working the crowd like a frantic politician. She was practically vibrating with nervous energy, loudly pointing out the details of the floral arrangements and making sure everyone within a 50-foot radius knew that they were sitting on an exclusive invitation-only billionaire compound. She was desperately trying to validate her own existence through the perceived prestige of the venue. My venue. The soft, elegant notes of a live string quartet began to float through the air, signaling the start of the ceremony. The guests quickly took their seats, and a hush fell over the great lawn. Preston Worthington stood at the altar looking incredibly handsome and genuinely nervous. He adjusted his tailored jacket and smiled brightly at the guests. He was a good man, inherently trusting, and perhaps a little too naive. He looked at the lavish floral arch and the sprawling estate around him with pure admiration, completely unaware that he was about to marry into a family constructed entirely of debt, deceit, and profound toxicity. The procession began. The 5 bridesmaids marched down the aisle, their faces tight with forced smiles. Next to the vibrant, lush greenery of the estate, their matching lavender polyester gowns looked incredibly flat and lifeless. They looked exactly like what they were, women wearing cheap clearance rack dresses because the bride had run out of money. Then the wedding march swelled, and Iman appeared at the start of the aisle. She was walking arm in arm with our father. Marcus puffed out his chest, looking around at the gathered crowd with absolute, unadulterated arrogance. He was walking his golden child down the aisle of a billionaire's estate, fully believing he had secured his family's place in high society forever. Iman looked beautiful, but her eyes were darting frantically around the crowd. I knew exactly what she was looking for. She was scanning the rows, searching for the neon orange monstrosity she had tried to force me to wear. She wanted to see me humiliated. She wanted to validate her own superiority. When her eyes finally reached the very last row, they locked onto me. I sat perfectly upright, the burnt orange silk of my Zia Couture gown draped flawlessly around my frame. I offered her a slow, serene, and entirely terrifying smile. Iman actually stumbled. Her foot caught the edge of her heavily beaded $80,000 gown, and she pitched forward slightly. Marcus had to quickly grip her arm to keep her from falling flat on her face in front of the Worthingtons. A soft gasp rippled through the front rows, but Iman quickly recovered, pasting a rigid, terrified smile back onto her face as she continued her march to the altar. The psychological warfare was already taking its toll on her. As the officiant began to speak, welcoming the guests and talking about the sacred, honest bond of marriage, I felt a sharp, distinct vibration against my thigh. I reached into the hidden silk pocket of my gown and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated with a highly secure encrypted notification from my estate management team. The message was from David, my lead financial director for the property. I tilted the screen slightly to shield it from the morning sun and opened the message. Boss, the automated billing system just processed the final transaction for the Adams Worthington event. I waited, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart beating with a steady, calculated rhythm. I watched Preston take Iman's hands at the altar, his eyes filled with absolute devotion. I watched my mother dab fake tears from her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My phone vibrated again. A second message from David appeared. The transaction for $200,000 has been officially declined by the bank. Code is insufficient funds. The secondary card on file was also declined. The bride's accounts are entirely frozen. I stared at the text. Iman had actually done it. She had walked down the aisle surrounded by hundreds of wealthy guests, knowing full well that the card she put on file for a $200,000 venue fee was going to bounce. She had maxed out every single line of credit she possessed just to buy the dress, the flowers, and the catering. She assumed that once she said her vows and officially became a Worthington, she could somehow make the venue debt disappear or perhaps manipulate Preston's family into paying it after the fact. She thought she could outsmart a billionaire property owner. I typed a rapid, precise reply. Expected. Do not alert the bride or the groom yet. Let the ceremony finish. Prepare the eviction protocol. Have the security team stand by at the perimeter of the reception tent. We will shut the entire event down exactly when they sit for dinner. I watched the screen indicate that David was typing a reply. I looked back up at the altar. The officiant was currently discussing the importance of transparency and trust in a marriage. The irony was so thick, it was practically suffocating. My family was built on a foundation of lies, and they were currently trespassing on my property to finalize their ultimate scam. My phone buzzed a third time. I looked down expecting a simple confirmation from David. Instead, the message on the screen made the blood freeze in my veins. The calm, calculated amusement I had been feeling instantly evaporated, replaced by a sharp, highly dangerous edge of absolute fury. Boss, we have a massive complication, David wrote. I stared at the screen, my eyes narrowing. I typed back immediately. Explain. The three dots appeared, lingering for a long, agonizing moment before the full block of text loaded onto my screen. When the transaction declined, I pulled the original application file to verify the guarantor details. The bride provided a comprehensive proof of funds to our office to secure the booking. I also have a note here that she provided this exact same financial portfolio to the Worthington Family Trust a month ago to prove she possessed independent equal wealth before signing the prenuptial agreement. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. What is the complication, David? The reply came seconds later. The bank statements she provided show over $12 million in liquid assets. The name on the top of the document says Iman Adams, but the documents are heavily doctored. We ran a deep verification on the watermarks. Sir, the bride sent a bank statement to the groom's family to prove their financial resources. That statement bears your social security number.